Right, welcome to your quick lesson / review of denotation and connotation. First thing we're going to do is go over the definition. So the denotation of a word is the literal meaning of it. We don't often hear the word denotation used because people will usually just say the definition instead of the denotation of a word. So if we look at this Vanitas painting, there is a lot of symbolism in this painting, and that's why we're going to use this as an example. So we can go over the literal meaning and some of the symbols present. If you look at the skull, which is one of the focal points of the painting, I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to give a brief pause. You answer the question out loud or in your head, and then I'll give you the answer and you can confirm that you actually knew the answer. So what is the literal meaning of that skull? So the literal meaning of the skull is that it is a bone from a human skeleton that holds a human brain, right? That's the literal meaning, the denotation of that skull. What's more interesting about this painting is to talk about the connotation, or the idea suggested by that skull. So it could be a word or a symbol. In this instance, it's a symbol. So again, I'm going to ask you a question and take a pause. So what is the idea suggested by that skull? Hopefully you said the concept of death, the concept of mortality, the fact that we're alive right now, but we will die someday. If we expand on that even further, we're talking about impermanence. We're talking about seize the day, carpe diem. This painting often, one of the purposes of these paintings were to remind us of our own mortality and that we would die, and so that we need to make the best of our life. Let's talk about some of the other symbols in the painting. One of the other main compositional elements of this painting is that vase of flowers. So the denotation of those flowers is the literal meaning is that they are plants that grow out of the ground, and you cut them and put them in a vase. The connotation, or the idea suggested by those flowers, if you take a look at the ones in the vase as well as the ones on the desk, what do you think the connotation is, or the idea suggested? Again, I'm going to take a brief pause. Okay, so the connotation of that vase of flowers might be something like the beauty of nature, or the splendor of nature, or the pleasure that we can see from nature and get from nature. Those are from the flowers inside the vase. But if you look to the left of the composition, you can see some of those tulips are drooping and they're dying. And if you look at the bottom left, you can see that rose drooping off of the desk is the most dead of them all. So again, they're reminding us of our mortality, of the impermanence of life, and of the fact that, those roses are only beautiful because they've been recently cut. And so I would go even further to say that part of the idea suggested by that is that we, in our search for pleasure and beauty, we sometimes can injure the things around us, nature, other people, what have you. Also, if you look below the vase, there's a string of pearls. And then to the right of the string of pearls is a stopwatch or a watch. And then to the right of that are some coins and a gold chain. So we know the literal definition, we know the literal meaning of those. So what do you think the connotation of those, or the suggested idea of that symbolism is? So hopefully you said something about how, our lives have a certain amount of time, that we don't have infinite lives, that our lives eventually end because of the time on the watch. And I would venture to say that because the watch is sitting in the middle of the pearls and the money and the chain, that the painter wanted to remind us that when we die, we can't take those riches with us. So in the end, what is the money and the gold and the pearls? What are they for if we can't take them with us and we all die anyways? And I would say that the painter is trying to say that your time is actually more valuable than the coins or the pearls, because time is what eventually stops for everyone, and the money will remain after we're gone. I would hope that the symbolism or the connotation behind the book is rather obvious. I didn't ask you a question in that instance, but when I pause for that long, that's when I'm hoping that you're feeling the silence on your end, that the symbolism present in that book is that the painter is saying that knowledge is important, that the pursuit of knowledge is important. There's also a paper there with words on it. I think that goes to further suggest that. The glasses in the background look like champagne flutes, at least the tall one does, or a cocktail glass, and then there's a pipe in the foreground with it looks like tobacco. What do you think is the connotative idea behind including those in the still life? And I'll wait a few seconds. I would say that the meaning of those symbols is that the painter in some ways values altered states of consciousness, right? Because those substances create altered states of consciousness in the human brain. And so I don't think it's a coincidence that they're located around the skull either. So maybe that this painter values those altered states of consciousness. I'm not sure. But they were clearly important enough to include in a painting that is filled with only a limited number of items already. There are some reflective surfaces. That pipe is sitting on something that's reflective. There's a shell that is highly reflective. I can't tell what the blue and silver things are on the shell, but what would a reflective surface in a painting like this also suggest? I would say that the painter was suggesting that self-awareness is important during this life, that reflection is important during this life, that you should spend part of your human time thinking about things and learning and growing and learning about yourself and gaining self-awareness, because usually a mirror, what we're looking at is ourself. And that big gold goblet to me kind of just fits in with the martini glass, or I can't remember what I just called it, the flute, the champagne flute, and the jewelry and things, because it's gold and it also holds liquid. So I think we can go ahead and move on. There's some jewelry that I didn't talk about in front of the skull, but I think again that fits in with the other jewelry, and they're more just compositional elements. Although I would love if one of you would come back to me with more information about that goblet, because it's pretty prominent in the composition, and arguably I think it interrupts the composition. I don't really love what it does for the composition, because otherwise it's normally a big triangle with the shadow on the wall and the skull and the flowers. So that goblet just like jutting right up right there, I don't love it. So it must have meant something for the artist to include it. And then I'm not sure what that object is in the background. this would be a good instance for a Google search, and I'm sure there's plenty of information on scholarly websites, and you might find some good stuff, good information on a regular Google search, because these paintings are so historical and so often studied. So continuing on, denotation of this image, literally a rose is a flower, like we talked about last year because we reviewed this example. A red flower, in this instance it's red. What is the connotative idea suggested by a rose? Usually in the world of symbols, a red rose symbolizes love. So if you see a red rose in a painting, then you can usually associate it with some type of love message, especially if it's red, because other color roses would symbolize other things. And flowers, I'm sorry, hold on. Go get a towel. And just like in the Vanitas painting, roses or flowers can symbolize other things besides just love. But I think a red rose is specifically love. So maybe you've heard this phrase before, the girl was blue, or you look blue, or they're blue. Is that denotation or connotation? Hopefully you said denotation, because when we say you look blue, we don't mean literally your skin is blue. We mean the connotative definition of you look sad. So that's an example of a common connotative meaning that we use as an idiom or in our culture. Okay, so now it's your turn to practice denotation and connotation. So go to Schoology, to your section. Go down to Unit 1, Intro to Design, which is a purple folder. And inside that folder, there is an assessment called Denotation and Connotation. Go ahead and complete that and submit it. And I hope you learned something, and I hope you did some answering in the pauses. But I suppose I'll check it out in your assessment, and have a great rest of your day. And I'll see you back on here on our virtual lessons.